even get in here. Do you see her? She's so short, and that dress is so tacky. Who wears cheetah? It's not even summer. Why does the DJ keep on playing Summertime Sadness? After we get out of the bathroom, can we go smoke a cigarette? I really need one. But first, let me take a selfie.
Hey guys, really topical song, right, for this lecture. So this is another two-parter, video 1, video 2, selfie in society, Snapchat and Instagram. It does tend to be, in the last couple of years, lots of people do their projects around these sites and use of these sites. So, you know, this is obviously going to be an important set of lectures. I think if you're thinking of doing your project on your use of Instagram or your use of Snapchat, or indeed your use of any platform which depends upon visual communication in particular and practices of usage of visual social media. So I call it selfie in society, but it's a bit broader than that, and there's a bit more to it than that. But I think the selfie phenomenon is really important, that it needs to be covered because it's a very important way of representing the self in contemporary society. But there's a lot of stuff in here which could be taken further in terms of visual communication. So in terms of what I want to do over these two videos, define the selfie first of all, contextualize the selfie as grounded in the theory of Irving Goffman and some other sociological theory as well. But Goffman is very, very important in this. If you haven't heard of Irving Goffman before now, don't worry about it. You will have at the end of these videos. And then identify and understand the range of communication possible through the selfie and visual communication in general, and critically evaluate the reasons why selfie become a salient form of communication through social media. So fairly straightforward outline of what we're going to do, but the material in here is very, very important and can be used in a lot of other elements of this module and with regards to how we present the self on social media in other ways too. So there's some critical theoretical material in these two videos. You might want to ask first of all, why a lecture on selfies? Why particular something on selfies? Well, some of the stats are bonkers, right? Every day, Facebook users upload 350 million photos, Instagram has shared 95 million photos, and 3 billion snaps on Snapchat, just in a day. And a large percentage of those are selfies. Now, not all of them are, but selfies have come to be seen as the bane and boom of internet-mediated visual practice, and so it's important that we address both the function and the form of this kind of self-photography. These are definitely not marginal practices, and the vehicle for sharing such representations of the self is social media. Therefore, you know, it's a very important topic within social media itself. It's very fair to say that selfies are a dominant mode of communication in social media. Therefore, it would be really amiss of me if I didn't do a lecture on selfies. The irony of it being, I don't take selfies of myself. There's a couple of reasons for that. One, I don't like having my photograph taken at all, let alone by me. So there's that one thing, you know, no photos, please, no photos, no photos. Two, I don't know how, because although I've got obviously the kit and the equipment, I have a phone, and you know, I'm not so stupid that I can't point the phone in the correct way to take a selfie. Simply the nuance of selfie is kind of lost on me because I haven't been socialized to this form of self-expression. You know, it's not something that I do, and it's not something I've been used to doing. And I think with you guys, it's a natural form of communication. It is something you do. You know, it is something, if you don't do it personally, then you can read selfies because you're exposed to them so much. I'm from an older generation, which, you know, people of my generation take selfies kind of look sad. They look sad because that's the way, you know, I read them as a Gen Xer. You know, I kind of read them in that way. What I'm missing as an individual is the ability to understand the nuance and the communicative practices, which you guys implicitly understand as selfie users and selfie takers. So, you know, my selfie is just an amateur effort. You guys are pro, you know, you're the best photographer generation that there's ever been. You take more photographs than anyone ever has. You've had very, very sophisticated photography tools all your lives, you know, through your use of digital media. Me, I'm hopeless. Can't do anything, you know. I'm shockingly bad. Look at the way I framed myself in this video, for goodness sake. I haven't even done my hair very tidily. I'm a lost cause when it comes to this sort of stuff. You guys, you're the best. So yeah, selfies in that way and that form of communication. As a practice, they're kind of lost on me. I just look mildly disturbed every time I take a selfie. You know, I got the head on and I just don't look good. You guys looks different. So why should we study them? So these slides, if you see slides that look like this in these two presentations, they are borrowed slides from Kat Tiedenberg. When she released her book on selfies a few years ago, she very handily did some PowerPoint slides as an accompaniment. So I'm just using Kat's stuff here. I would be credited them, but my picture's in the way of where it says Kat's name, unfortunately. So on the actual slides that go up on Canvas, which you can download and look at, these are correctly attributed to Kat Tiedenberg. So why should we study selfies? Well, people actually like taking and looking at selfies. It's a basic sort of human need to look at human faces. You know, psychological studies show that babies have that instinct to look at human faces from a couple of days old. They prefer the human face to any other kind of face that they're shown. And that basic psychological reaction to the human face, it continues as we get older. We have preference towards the human face. Selfies basically generate more engagement than most other social media content because of that, but they're often very negatively portrayed. You know, the selfie generation is portrayed as the nihilistic, yeah, I suppose when we get to next week that'll make more sense to you, nihilistic and narcissistic generation. I talked about narcissism in the last video for last week, and they've very much been labels which have been attached to selfie culture. You know, that young people just sit around and they take photos of themselves all day and blah, 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 blah. And people who make those comments don't realize how extensive and ingrained that communication culture is and how nuanced the selfie is in terms of communicating messages about your own sort of state at that point in time and communicating messages in a very, very sophisticated way. So selfies and selfie takers generate very passionate popular reactions, both positive and negative, which is indicative of a broader cultural practice and anxieties around technology, self-presentation, etc., gender, norms, identity, all these sort of things. So selfies are a very important vehicle about discussing the state of culture in this age, you know, and they are definitely part of social media culture. So selfies, really, I want to position selfies as a form of communication. Selfies are often passionately discussed in the media and often seen as a stick to beat millennials, and you guys would be Gen Zers with narcissistic, vain, disconnected, self-obsessed, etc., etc. So selfies are like bait for likes and comments on social media, fulfilling a grim feedback loop of validation. Again, this will make more sense, but I've already discussed this last week, this idea that social media content gets stuck in these feedback loops of validation, and selfies are often positioned in that. So selfies are framed as a base culture, not worthy of critical attention, but they get the attention nevertheless. Now, there's some weird paradox going on there, you know. We should ignore selfies, and we're not. We don't. And we paid very close attention to them. So, you know, there's a paradox going on there, which means we should really get in the middle of that and see what's going on. The positive view of selfies, which is the view that I take, is we don't have to subscribe firstly to the negative view. Selfies can be seen as a means of experiencing and expressing yourself as a human being. How you present yourself through the selfie, how you position yourself, how you prepare to take a selfie, it's all deliberative acts which are meant as a communicative message. There is a sophisticated message being encoding in the practice of the taking of and sharing of selfies. You know, even the sharing of, which platform you choose to share it on, how you choose to share it. Do you put limits on that share? Do you apply filters to it, etc., etc.? These are all deliberate decisions made to communicate a rather sophisticated message to other people, and therefore I think they have a very important function in contemporary society. They are about building and maintaining relationships over time, far more complex than just boring millennial or Gen Z narcissism, which is kind of a ridiculous way of looking at these things. For me, selfies can be seen as expressive acts. They can be seen as photographic objects which get shared and moved around. Cultural practice in itself. We're engaging in digital media culture and social media culture when we engage in the selfie. They're a form of gesture, a means of communicating and understanding ourselves. Not just communicating to others, but also communicating to ourselves about what kind of feelings we have at that point in time and how we want to mediate those and how we want to share those. Tools for reclaiming our sexuality, experiencing our bodies, or performing different versions of ourselves, which are all very important psychological things. They're addictive practice that exhibit or lead to psychopathology. Yes, if all you do is selfies. I've got cousins like this who like all the time. It's like, girls, you need to calm down. There can be an addictive practice to doing this, but that's at the very negative end of things, and most selfie takers aren't there. They're definitely tools for gaining visibility over social media, which can be important to us in terms of our own esteem. And you can go on and on about what the positive aspects of selfie taking are, and indeed some of the problematic aspects, but they're much more complex than saying this is all about, Gen Z narcissism. So are they good or bad? Well, they're neither. Like most things in life, selfies are neither good nor bad. They are nuanced. If they're seen as a way of expressing ourselves, then that question is completely redundant at all. What selfies mean depend on the context in which they happen. Whose selfie? Who's the subject of the selfie? What's on and in them? Why were they shared? Why were they shared? These are much more interesting questions than saying selfies are boring and bad. Nah. That's just to dismiss a very important form of communication in contemporary society. And we don't want to do that. We want to get into these things and we want to understand them implicitly. So, what therefore can we call selfie culture as a subsection of social media culture? And I talked about this last week in the video. The basic sociological definition of culture states that all culture has 5 elements: the symbolic, the linguistic, values, norms, and material artifacts. And all of these are learned through participation. Now, selfie culture means people ways of taking, sharing, posting, filtering, liking, and deleting. And deleting is really, really important here. We forget most selfies that are taken don't get shared. They get deleted. So that's a very important aspect of selfie culture. We're talking about the norms and values that guide these behaviors and our collective ways of talking about selfies. So go back to that list of 5: symbols, language, values, norms, material artifacts. In terms of symbols and language, we're talking about ways of taking, sharing, posting, filtering, liking, and deleting. Norms and values which govern and guide the behavior, and our collective way of talking about selfies is part of the material aspects of what selfies are. These are material things that get shared around. We experience them in that way. What the hell is a selfie? Now I'm going to do the trick which I always tell you guys not to do, right? I'm going to take a definition from a dictionary. I always say don't use definitions in dictionaries, but do as I say, not as I do in this instance, right? Selfie is a carrier of multiple meanings collapsed into one entity, the image. So the Oxford English Dictionary, in the first year that they defined selfies in 2013, they had 3 parts to this definition: a photographic object, so it has to be a photograph; a self-representational object taken of oneself, although that can be mixed. It doesn't necessarily mean have to be of your face or something. Selfies can be of other parts of you, or indeed the face can be, remixed or remediated in different ways. And it has to be a digital networked object. It has to be taken with not necessarily with a smartphone, but it has to be taken with something, which means it can be shared and uploaded on social media. So these are the basic conditions for what a selfie is. And therefore, the selfie itself belongs in a long history of self-portraiture. So if you look back to MS120 last year, and I talked about the history of photography example and the history of portraiture, you can draw on that sort of things when you're talking about selfies and their long lineage. But throughout history, the idea of portraiture and self-portraiture has been incredibly important in terms of our self-representation, and importantly as a way of defining class and status in society. And selfies play a similar kind of role. There are codes and there is a language of the selfie which denotes what kind of person we are in terms of the stratifications of society and class, wealth, etc., etc. There are markers of that in the selfie. So learning the practices of selfie becomes very important in terms of our self-presentation. So self-representation could have been previously through writing or self-portraiture. Here we have a different way of doing it. It is just a different way of doing it. And then, we can think of selfies also as a product of the affordances of the internet and digital media, but beware technological determinism in that viewpoint, because that would suggest that, selfies are a product of technology themselves, but they're not. They're a socio-technical object. They are, they do have technology involved, but they also have people involved, and they also have our intentions, and they have our values and social norms, etc., all involved in the process of a selfie as well. So a nuanced approach will appreciate that all three features need to be simultaneously present for a selfie to be a selfie. This differentiates the form of other photographs, self-representations, or digital media. It must be a photo. It must be intended as and legible as a self-representation, but that doesn't mean it has to be a clear photo of oneself in that way. It has to technologically afford easy sharing through social networks. It doesn't necessarily therefore have to be an image of a face, and it need not be shared to be a selfie, but just the possibility that it could be shared means this is a selfie. So, go back to cat again. What does cat have to say about this? Rather than just being a photographic object like a family photo or landscape, or a self-representative object like autobiographical writing, or a networked object like a tweet or a dating profile, a selfie is a configuration of all three. So cat defines selfies as self-representational networked photographs. Each of the three aspects have their own histories which guide how selfies are experienced and made sense of by us. So, very important in your definition of selfie, this is what a selfie is. You're doing those things, you're taking a selfie. Excellent. Now, the key concepts that we need to get to grips with for making sense of selfies are affordances. That is, what does the device you're using allow you to do? Discourse and rhetoric, what is being said and what is being persuaded through this image at this point in time. Interaction, how do we interact with selfies? How do we not interact with selfies? Performativity, taking a selfie is a performance. You know, you are performing a role at that point in time to communicate something. The entirety of selfie culture, therefore, mixes all these things in. We're talking about social cues, we're talking about virality, how they spread, visibility, how they're seen, visuality, what is the visual content of them, and visual culture in general. All of these become important aspects of what we're talking. So far from just being bland narcissism, you've got all these aspects that go into a selfie itself. In terms of self-representation, which is what I want to concentrate on, you know, selfies are incredibly important. Self-representation for Tiedenberg is how we use signs to attribute meaning to ourselves via whatever it is we've chosen to stand in for ourselves. So self-representations are deeply personal but culturally informed ways of using signs to express ourselves. The sign here very often is the pose, the gaze, etc., and the angle and so on of the selfie that we take to represent ourselves in a particular way. So representations, therefore, are really, really important in understanding the function and the role of the selfie. Now, for Stuart Hall, representation is what indexes us to others in society. How we represent ourselves and how we position ourselves is how other people recognize us and classify us in a particular society. So therefore, the selfies that we produce of ourselves are very important in how other people understand us in a society. And that's incredibly important. So self-representation as our choice of that which indexes us to others because we identify with it. You know, so we are identifying that this is I, this is me. We are sharing that with others and they are indexing us on that basis. So these are deeply personal but culturally informed processes of using different signs to express ourselves. So self-portraiture became historically prominent, but self-scrutiny and personal salvation became important in Victorian times. This led to a cultural belief that a person's face is a meaningful indicator of who they are, never more so than in digital culture and social media culture. Visual self-representation has long been linked to personal identity in this way. So the selfie plays an incredibly important role for us, not just as how we represent ourselves to others, but for the other to understand us. And therefore, a very keen and skilled selfie taker can construct an image for others based on their selfie practices. And if you're going to get into selfies for your project, really what you're talking about is your practices of taking and sharing. What kind of representation and image are you trying to construct with this? Or you may want to look at the selfies you encounter on social media and unpick, what are people trying to communicate with these images? Because there is a very subtle and nuanced communication of both self-identity, personal identity, and how people want others to categorize them going on in these images. Theoretically, where we need to go with this is to this gentleman. It's not the greatest picture of all time, right? I often looked at that picture and thought, wow, does Irving Goffman have werewolf hands? Kind of weird looking. The presentation of the self is a particular function of the selfie, though. And self-presentation as an academic concern is most closely associated with this gentleman, the Canadian sociologist Irving Goffman. Self-presentation means everything we do to manage the impressions we make on other people. Life is a stage for Goffman, and everything we do is a stage of management. We manage our impressions. I'm trying to do it right now, right? And you know, most of you would have been in a lecture theatre with me at some point. You know, I'm not exactly the smartest individual on earth, but that's part of my self-presentation strategies. We have loads of self-presentation strategies, according to Goffman, that we use to manage the impressions that we make on other people. All the choices we make about how we look, what we dress, what our glasses look like, what piercings we have, what tattoos are visible, you know, what shoes we wear, what jeans we wear, the brands that we buy, the type of drink that we drink, the type of food that we eat. These are all part of the management of impressions on others. They're not just the choices we make because we like them. Within those choices, there are distinct impressions that we are trying to manage with others as well. Self-presentation is not about overt strategic performance where we're trying to fool people or appear as something we're not. What Goffman's interested in is far more in the everyday processes. This really refers to the acts that emotionally intelligent people do to persuade their interactional partners of their version of the shared situation they are in, and if you like, the authenticity of themselves as a person within those. So selfies act as a form of self-presentation, and selfie practices themselves allow us to be present in a shared situation. For Nick Couldry, this means that, you know, this idea of presencing is the use of media to push information about ourselves into public circulation on social media. So what we're doing when we take selfies is sustaining a public presence in an information-saturated world. We are making an imprint on this world, and we are managing those imprints very carefully.